All right, so be honest. How many of you have purchased or used an elevation training mask? Keone, Ian, anyone else? All right, it's pretty good. So, what do you think? Do they work? Keone?
Uh,
Maybe Ian was gonna say it too, but I learned this last year when I got one. It just doesn't work. It doesn't work.
Ian, what was your experience?
I mean, like, it made it harder to breathe, and I've heard a lot of different things about like whether they work or not. So I don't know if like that like actually helped or if it was just like a waste of a waste.
Hmm. It definitely does something, but what we'll get at is there's a little bit of an inaccuracy in the labeling of it. But anyone else have any thoughts? Julia, what was your group talking about?
We were talking about how maybe it could work, but you have to use it for, you'd have to have a specific purpose. Like if you're going to the gym, or for me, I play water sports, so it's not like you can wear it in the water because the obvious it would suffocate
That-
you. But so it's really only made for like one group of people, I guess.
Mhm. Yeah, so a swimmer's mask, that'd be like the ultimate challenge. That'd be pretty intense. Shay, what did your group discuss?
Um, we were kind of like, we were talking about, I mean, two of us said that we think it would work, but then one of us said that we didn't think it would work. And I don't know. I was the only one that said I would try it, but I wouldn't like try it for a long period of time. Like I would try it for like maybe like 1 or 2 minutes. But, like I feel like it'd be kind of an unpleasant experience.
Yeah,
Just I don't know.
it's definitely something you'd have to get used to. I will admit I've also considered buying one just because I thought they looked pretty cool. That's just part of it definitely makes people think that you're doing a really intense workout if you'd be wearing one of those. And nowadays with COVID being, I still like to go runs for runs outside. So I'd almost like buy one of these as something as a safety thing, but anything that has valves on it, actually they're showing is not actually safe. So this would not necessarily be a COVID safe filter either. At least it's not what it's meant for. So we'll do a little video exploration to get at exactly what's going on with these, but there's some interesting scientific studies. What always struck me about these commercials, like I would see them and I'd be like, great, like I understand what's happening, and there probably is some physiological strengthening that's happening as a result of these masks. But if you really wanted long-term effects, you wouldn't just wear it while you're working out, right? You would wear it all the time and while you're sleeping, you know? Anyway, and that's something you'll get at with these videos. So, okay, the next thing for you to do is there are two Edpuzzle videos that I've put together. So these are on the tasks to complete list. It's step number 4, altitude training. Go through in order. The first one is science altitude training. Click on that. It'll take you to an Edpuzzle. There's just 2 questions, and the video is about 3 minutes long. And then once you're done with that, go to the next one, which is science of elevation training masks. Click on that. Again, that one is also about 3 minutes with 2 questions. If you can't get Edpuzzle to work, I put links to just the videos as well in a bullet point underneath those. So I'm going to time us for 10 minutes to work through these, and I can watch your progress on the Edpuzzle website. So make sure you're working on each video, one and then the second one about masks, and then we'll come together to discuss what you learned. So I'll be here listening if you have trouble connecting or not sure what to do. Otherwise, 10 minutes for step number 4, 2 Edpuzzles. Go for it. Let's just take a look at our results. First video about altitude training. First question was, what is a common misunderstanding about altitude training that many people have or share? And as you saw from that video, it's the lungs. Everyone thinks it's the lungs, that it expands the lungs, that it's strengthening the lungs. The reality is that it has absolutely nothing really to do with the lungs, at least not directly. So next question was, the real benefit of altitude training is that it increases red blood cell count. Why is this beneficial? And the correct answer was that it gives you more oxygen carriers in your blood. 10 out of you got that right. 10 out of 12, 1 out of 12 got the first one right. So it looks like good takeaways there. Anything surprising about that video? Has anyone done any altitude training before? Yeah?
Not on purpose.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think, what's the elevation of Tahoe? I don't know if it's above 5,000.
7,000.
No, it's above 6,000. It's like
Yeah.
6,000 something.
Oh, right. So so technically if you work out up there, you are technically altitude training at that point. I have climbed what's the big mountain in Japan? Why am I blanking on it? Mount Fuji. I have climbed Mount Fuji in Japan, and that was where we had to sleep right at the top. You get up and do the sunrise thing. And I remember I couldn't sleep because the minute you would fall asleep and your breathing would slow down, I felt like I was suffocating because the air was just so much thinner. So kind of interesting that, again, there's such a widespread misunderstanding about that, though, that it all comes back to the blood. Okay, so now our little mystery about the training masks. First question was, in reality, what do the elevation training masks actually do? And yeah, all they do is they make it harder to breathe, which is great for your diaphragm, right? It's going to really strengthen your lungs in terms of the power you have for breathing. But that's all that it's really doing, right? These products should not be advertised as elevation training masks. Only 6 out of 12 of you got these right. They should be advertised as training aids. That's really all it is. So it is doing some benefit, but it's not mimicking elevation at all. So if you have one of those masks, I think it's still okay to use it. It's going to be good for strengthening your lungs a little bit, but it's not increasing your red blood cell count if that's what your goal is. So does anyone have any ideas though of how you could, if the secret to elevation training is to increase your red blood cell count based on what you've been reading and some of the stuff we discussed earlier, what is a way that you could artificially do that? Any
Go
hints?
live somewhere with high elevation.
Yeah. Does anyone know what nationality of people tend to be very good at running marathons and tend to win marathons? Anyone notice what country the winners often come from? Keone?
Is it like African or
Anyone know which
Kenya.
country in Africa in particular?
Kenya.
Kenya?
Kenyans and Ethiopians tend to be very good long distance runners, and that's because when you look at the average elevation of Kenya in general, where a lot of these people were born and raised, they're raised at extremely high elevations, and so they naturally have very high red blood cell counts. And so when they come to run a marathon in Boston or in Big Sur, which is at sea level, they're basically getting high off of oxygen, right? Their breathing is so incredibly efficient for a pretty good period of time that they are pretty good at running. So it can influence the general biology of a person. Yep. Is there a way to cheat with that though?
Blood doping.
And so we'll watch a short thing about how blood doping works, and there's 2 different mechanisms. But first thing I want to show you that was kind of cool that Mr. Olson actually introduced to me is that there is actually an effective way for people who want to mountain climb to pre-acclimate, and it's not a mask. Anyone see this image? What do you sleep in? What does that look like?
A tent.
Yeah,
tent.
it's an airtight tent that has some kind of machine hooked up to it, I guess, that regulates how much oxygen is present. And so it literally mimics high altitude environments. And so this is something that can actually, in the long term, start to increase your red blood cell count. And so a lot of climbers, I don't think professional athletes do this very much, but this is something climbers do. They'll do this right before they go on a major expedition. And so it just means that when they're getting to the base camp, and normally you would have to sit there for, as you learned in the video, more than a week, like 11 days for every 1,000 feet that you gain. I think this allows them to do that a lot faster, that they've kind of they're front loading the production of the red blood cells in their body. And so this kind of, again, they call it pre-acclimation, helps prepare them for it. So anyway, I thought it was kind of cool that there's this whole brand. They're called, where was it? Oh, here you go. The hypoxico altitude tents. We'll talk about hypoxia in a second. But yes, the other method is blood doping. So I'm going to show you another short video here. Just play with my audio.
Wins the Tour de France. In professional sports, the stakes are high. Athletes want to win.
It's you versus the clock, you versus the other competitors, you against yourself.
Is there any stopping the Lance Armstrong in this Tour de France? And there's big money. Some will do whatever it takes to be the best.
We live in a performance-enhanced world, so we have performance-enhancing drugs in sports.
Mayo Clinic Dr. Michael Joyner is an anesthesiologist whose research focuses on understanding elite athletes, how they reach maximum performance. He says it's all about oxygen delivery to the body's tissues.
One of the things that determines the maximum ability of somebody to use oxygen is how many red blood cells they have circulating around in their body. Blood doping is an effort to raise the number of blood cells by taking blood out, storing it, and then reinfusing it later.
Red blood cells carry oxygen to the body's tissues. When the stored blood is returned to the body, there's a sudden boost of red blood cells. Those cells carry higher than normal amounts of oxygen to muscles, enhancing performance.
The other thing people do is use a drug called erythropoietin, or EPO, to boost the body's natural production of red blood cells.
An injection of EPO stimulates your bone marrow to make more red blood cells, boosting levels of oxygen getting to your muscles and boosting performance.
Just kind of the body's own factory that makes red cells gets cranked up.
Both techniques are not just for athletic enhancement. They're also needed in the medical world. EPO is used to help keep up red blood counts, such as for people on dialysis. And removing blood to put back later is common during surgery.
You're not going to stop the onslaught of Lance Armstrong.
Still, blood doping for performance enhancement is illegal in the sports world. And Dr. Joyner suspects that as long as the stakes are high, some athletes will be tempted to dope.
All right. So when an athlete is blood doping, what are they actually doing? Like, what is blood doping? We can put it in simple terms.
Injecting themselves with more blood.
Yeah.
Basically.
And is it artificial blood or their own blood?
Their own.
It's their own, right? And so this is why this is one of these things that, especially when it comes to big athletic events like the Tour de France, this is one of those things that is pretty hard to detect, because if you're just injecting yourself with your own blood, there's not many tests that are going to reveal that. However, we've been learning a little bit about the heart and pumping blood and stuff. When you inject yourself with more blood, anyone want to guess what that's going to do to your blood pressure? Yeah, sends it up. And then these guys are getting on, like if you're doing Tour de France, that's 21 straight days of intense riding. And so the strain that puts the heart under can actually be really risky. So these guys are, as much as you think they care about their bodies and they're trying to, achieve athletically, they're actually putting themselves at huge risk of hurting themselves by injecting themselves with their own blood. I'm sure a lot of you have heard of Lance Armstrong and his massive fall from grace. And it was discovered that he was actually, the blood doping he was doing, though, wasn't that he was injecting himself with his own blood. He was injecting himself with a hormone. And you guys read about this in the homeworks. Who remembers what's the hormone that triggers your kidneys to ramp up red blood cell production in the bones? Remember
EPO.
The three-letter? Yeah, EPO. And that's basically I think it's erythropoietin or something like that, but it's going to trigger what's called erythropoiesis, which is telling your bones, hey, we need more red blood cells. And so the red marrow begins to make more of your red blood cells. And again, that was something that a couple of athletes have injected. And again, it's hard to detect because it's a natural hormone that the body makes. But what's in extremely high amounts, then there's something suspicious going on. And I think that's what happened with Lance Armstrong and a couple of the other big athletes. So kind of interesting. Okay. What I want to move on to now is something that is going to be a theme that we're going to have throughout this course, which is, again, looking at mountain climbing. So we've been talking about altitude training and stuff, which happens at 5,000 feet or higher. But what happens when you get to 20,000 feet? Or again, Mount Everest is 29,000 feet, just shy of 30,000 feet. That's where we start to see some damage actually occurring. And so I'm going to share my screen here again real quick, and I'm going to try to use my iPad here. And these are actually some slides that Mr. Olson prepared for me. He is very passionate about climbing, and he has done some mountain climbing of his own, which we'll hopefully have him share later on. Okay, everyone's seeing high altitude mountaineering. I'll need verbal confirmation. Can't see you.
Yes.
Okay, and you have access to these same slides on the tasks to complete list. This is that same video that I showed at the start of class of some people summiting Everest. And it's just really interesting to see how out of breath they are and how exhausted they seem. So, okay, so what's going on with elevation and oxygen content? The first common misunderstanding with this is people say, well, there's just less oxygen. And that's true, but not from a percentage standpoint. air always has 21% oxygen. That's just sort of like the global standard. That's true at high altitude, and it's true at low altitude at sea level. It's just the amount, right? So I like this diagram because I think it helps explain that, for every 28 molecules of nitrogen gas, which is the most abundant gas in the air we breathe, it's totally inert, doesn't do anything. And then you get 7 oxygen molecules for that. At high altitude, the air is just way thinner, right? There's way less nitrogen, but again, proportionally, there's also less oxygen. So it's still technically the same content relative to the other molecules. But I like this diagram really shows you that gravity, we don't often think of gravity as affecting gases, but it totally does, right? Our atmosphere is being pulled down to Earth by gravity. And so there's way more oxygen. The density is much higher at sea level than it is at high altitude. And so that's why we refer to this as the thinner air, right? Which is much harder to breathe. So again, that's just a percentage relative to the content of air, right? That's always consistent. But let's say that again, if I took a box, right, a single sample of air at sea level and the exact same size sample up here at high altitude, that's where you would see a change in the overall percentage, like how much oxygen would be present. If you consider this 100%, where you've got quite a bit of oxygen, then there is, yes, indeed, way less oxygen. So think of that as a breath, right? Every breath that you take at sea level, you're getting a pretty good amount of oxygen, whereas relative to sea level, you're getting only 32% of what you would get at sea level at high altitude. Once you hit 30,000 feet, that is the height of Mount Everest. That's also cruising altitude for most airplanes. So that's where airplanes are flying. And again, not somewhere that the human body is well adapted to survive. So that explains why there's just way less oxygen. The biological consequence of this in our body is referred to as hypoxia. And there's actually a Wikipedia page that I'm going to direct you guys to. And I'd like you to take just 5 minutes to read through what you can on this Wikipedia page. I'll throw you into breakout rooms to then discuss it. And then we'll come back together to kind of share what's going on with hypoxia. So 2 ways you can access this link. You can either go to the tasks to complete list, and if you hit refresh, I actually posted the link right underneath the link to the slides on step 6. So if you just refresh the page, it should pop up. If not, you can just open the slides, click on the high altitude circulation slides, and it's on the 3rd slide there. Should take you to the Wikipedia page. So I'm going to time for 5 minutes to just let you all read through that Wikipedia page, get as much information as you can about hypoxia, and then we'll have a little discussion about what's going on. Go for it.
I learned that if you just like ascend to like a higher altitude, you get altitude sickness. So
yes, this is definitely a contributor to that. Mm-hmm. Molly, what's something you learned about hypoxia?
That it can cause like organ failure and stuff like that.
Yes, oxygen is definitely needed. And so if we're not getting that, especially the brain, it's not somewhere you want to see failure, especially if you're climbing a mountain with equipment and have to keep your wits about you. Gary Fernandez, what's something you learned?
That silent hypoxia has something to do with COVID-19.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that actually relates a little bit to the lungs. I'll have to remember to include that. So, all right. Okay, let me tie all this now back to our slides and our climbing and what exactly is going on in the body. Now, this gets a little complicated. You don't need to know the exact details of this. We're going to touch back on this climbing stuff more and more as we continue to learn more about the lungs and other parts of the body. But when you are at high elevation, climbers have to really be careful for acute hypoxia. And this is why I mentioned that a lot of climbers actually bring oximeters with them, the same finger oximeters that you're using, because those give them a pretty decent reading of where their blood oxygen is. And hypoxia is a marked reduction, right? It's a low oxygen at the tissue level. So your blood just is not delivering oxygen to the tissues where it's needed. And this causes a whole bunch of things. But the main thing that happens is that you have these chemoreceptors that get released in your body, and they kick in your sympathetic activation. This is your fight or flight response, right? Think of this as panic. Your body goes into panic mode. because you're not getting enough oxygen. And so it tries to ramp up the heart rate. It tries to pump more blood from the heart. Your blood pressure is going to go way up. And so you're just going into total overdrive, right? And cold can often amplify this as well. And usually at high elevation, you're experiencing cold. But at the same time, there's systemic vasodilation. What this means is liquid leaves the blood, right? So there's less blood liquid. And that is actually going to counteract this a little bit, right? So suddenly now your blood pressure is actually going to go down, right? It won't go up because liquid is actually leaving your circulatory system and entering other areas. And this is what causes a lot of the problems with climbers, is that your lungs will sometimes fill up with liquid, and that's the COVID connection. So COVID usually causes pneumonia, where parts of the lungs start to fill up with liquid, and therefore oxygen can't be absorbed by the blood, and therefore the blood oxygen levels plummet. And that's one of the signs of being infected with COVID-19. It's basically pneumonia, right, is what it's giving you. And so that's the connection there. But yes, and now you've got pulmonary vasoconstriction, meaning again that you're not breathing as much, blood isn't being delivered to the lungs as much. You're actually starting to breathe out more as well, which is kind of interesting. So in the breathing, it just becomes really short, and it leads to pulmonary hypertension, where again, it's really hard for the heart to pump blood to the lungs and back. And this is not a good condition to be in, right? This is why climbers go through acclimatization, because the goal is to avoid having this happen, or at least if it does happen, you're able to keep your wits about you and keep moving enough that you can get back down to an elevation and get enough oxygen in your body to allow your organs to recover. And again, we're going to touch on this more when we get into climbing stuff. As you saw in the picture in Wikipedia, has anyone ever noticed that? And maybe if you have a grandmother or somebody elderly who sometimes has kind of the blue coloration in their fingers. I had a grandmother that I definitely saw that in, and was just a sign of poor circulation to the extremities. So, okay, any questions on that? All right, again, that's just something we'll touch more on. We're going to talk about what are called HAP and HACE, which are edemas, right? There's different types of edema that happen. Your brain will fill with fluid as well because of this vasodilation. So, okay, well, the big thing is homework for next time is I've got a short reading that I'd like you to do that relates to what we were just talking about, circulation, high elevation, and there's no quiz on that. It's just the notes photo. So just submit one photo of notes. But can anyone tell me what else we're doing the next time we meet?
Test.
We are having our first test. So it will be open notes, no time limit. We'll probably give you most, if not all, of the period to work on it. I am working right now on a study guide and review slides, which I don't have together yet, but I will have them together definitely by the end of today. But please be prepared on Tuesday to take your first assessment all about circulation. So it'll cover the chapters in Hall that we have read, and some of the activities that we've done, like graphing your heart rate and different things like that, and definitely some drawing stuff as well. So happy to answer any questions about that if you have them. Again, I will get the review slides and study guide out as soon as I can, and you'll have that to refer to. And again, it's open notes. You can refer to whatever you need to while you take it. Any questions on that? All right, that's it for me, kids. Thank you very much. Have a good weekend.
Hi, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.